Well, hey, it's Simon Breakspear, and thanks for your interest in implementing teaching sprints across your school, or perhaps for some of you, across a whole network or district of schools. In this video, I want to give you some key frames to be thinking about in your role as a leader or as a member of an implementation team who's thinking about how to take this idea of teaching sprints and find a way for it to live comfortably and add value within your school organization. The first thing I want to say is you need to be really careful about bringing any new ideas into schools. I think staff are rightly getting a little bit skeptical and even cynical about just the inflow of stuff that comes in. Pre-packaged things with shiny names that get brought into schools that are meant to shape what they do now. And after a couple of rounds of that, especially if there hasn't really been a good implementation process and support and clarity about how it connects within the school culture and what's occurring, people start to learn how to either actively resist or passively just go through the motions, but they change their language, but they don't change anything deeply. So I say this with full critique of myself, because there's something about teaching sprints that is both a great kind of frame, people remember it, but doesn't it just sound like the next new thing in education? I gotta be honest, I've lost sleep about this. Sometimes I think it's a great name because people remember it. Sometimes I think it's a terrible name because it sounds like a new shiny thing in education. Now, of course, if you've got into the book, and hopefully you have, and you've checked out some of the ideas, I say that it's super short and easy to get through, you'll know that there's in some ways nothing new under the sun in this one. It's just core good thinking about using research, about working as teams, and about deliberately practicing. But we had to name it something to help people get their head around it and get moving on it. And so just be aware that teaching sprints kind of sounds like the next new thing coming in, and you should be really careful about when and if you even refer to the name in the early days of exploring this idea in your context. Because the goal is not just to get people doing sprints. The goal should be to focus on building your professional learning culture as a school. And so whatever your school name is, focus on the insert school name, professional learning culture. And the goal is to start to move towards a culture where all of the adults in our building are given an opportunity to deliberately and explicitly improve their craft each and every year. John Hattie, a professor from the University of Melbourne, famously said, we want all of our students in our schools to achieve at least 1 year of learning growth for 1 year of schooling. Well, in a deliberately developmental organization, in a learning organization, we need all of our adults to have the opportunity to make at least 1 year of progress in their craft for 1 year of teaching. And this is an opportunity. We can't force people to get better. But our job as leaders within a school, thinking about a different approach to professional learning, has got to be about building a really compelling professional learning culture. So that's the first thing. Don't just think about implementing sprints. Think about elevating the conversation about how we're building a structure and a culture around professional growth and learning. Well, if you're interested in building a culture of professional growth and learning, I reckon you've got a big problem. Here it is. There's a tension, the fundamental tension we try to deal with in teaching sprints. The first thing is we need our people to keep getting better. If our people are going to keep having a growing impact on learning, if they're going to be able to solve more challenging, complex problems in the classroom, and to be honest, if they're going to keep growing and developing and having a sense of purpose and mastering their job, we need them to keep getting better, both for the sake of the students and for their own joy and growth in the profession. But on the other side is teaching has never been more intense. The demands are growing. Everyone tells us they're overloaded, overworked, and they don't know where to get going on their to-do list. And now you've got a tension. You want to build a professional learning culture, and you've got a tension between, well, wait a second, we need people to keep getting better, and yet they're always overloaded. And so what happens is we continue to delay practice improvement. Because if we don't do practice improvement this week, it doesn't really matter. Like, let's just focus on doing the job. And then next week, let's just focus on doing the job. And hey, we were going to do some collaboration around improvement, but maybe we could just reallocate that time to some planning or some assessment moderation. And what happens is bit by bit, we keep delaying quality practice improvement which means then we flatline in our capabilities and the work doesn't get easier over time. So what are we going to do? Well, the simple answer in teaching sprints is to do less, better, and more sustainably. That within the kind of kernel of the teaching sprints idea, if there's any breakthrough here, it's simply this. Rather than doing no practice improvement because you're overloaded, do something small, meaningful, and sustainable. That's it. And so when you think about building the professional learning culture, we've got three big ideas within the teaching sprints approach. And you don't even have to call this the teaching sprints approach. Just kind of talk about these big ideas as a way that you want to build out your professional learning process and structure. So the first one's all about using research evidence. Okay, so why would we use research evidence? Well, number one, we're flat out and busy, so we have no spare time, right? So if we were going to ask our people to deliberately allocate some time to improvement, we'd only want them to do that on something that has a really high likelihood of improving their practice in a way that impacts students. I don't want to ask someone to spend serious time just having a chat about practice with someone else or trying out something that someone else suggested, but there's no real evidence that it's better than what they're currently doing. I mean, if you've got lots of spare time, go for it. But if you don't, we need to honor the minimum time that we've got available by making sure we only work on things that are really likely to pay off for kids. So that's why we go to the research. The research tells us what's worked on average in the past. It gives us the best bets for what could really improve our teaching. And so the first thing is I want to suggest we want to build a professional learning culture that starts with engagement with research. Quality research that is translated for practice, and we're trying to pick up things that are very high leverage. So we want to look for strategies out of the research that both could have a big impact on student learning because we can connect to that, how it impacts on learning pathways, but we also want to make sure we're doing things that are learnable, developable. There's no use working on a strategy that may potentially have a big impact on learning, but it's very, very hard to implement in the busyness of school life. So that first big idea we pick up in the teaching sprints approach is all about research engagement. But I want you to see that it's connected to a logic about how do we actually get a professional learning culture occurring when people are busy. Number two, the big idea is all about practicing. And this is just simply to say that there's a whole literature in expertise development that's on the area of deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is the best kind of summary of, I think, what we think we know from the psychological research about how humans get better at what they do. Deliberate practice is harder to do in education than it is, for example, in sport, where people know exactly the next steps to help you progress in your work, and someone can give you deliberate feedback on exactly where you're up to and to improve your tennis serve or your piano playing or whatever else. But our approach is to take deliberate practice as a concept and as a process and to say we want to find a way to make this work within education. And deliberate practice is going to be about working on one thing at a time, pushing beyond our comfort zone, making sure we're engaging in intense practice activities by doing the work in the context of the work. And we're trying to build up our adaptive expertise by actually trying something out in the real world. And then thirdly, the third big idea that we talk about and that I want to suggest to you should be really guiding your direction of building your professional learning culture and structures and processes is this idea of tiny shifts. And this comes much more out of the behavioral science research, which suggests, look, adults are pretty terrible at meaningfully changing behavior. Exercise, eating, drinking, finance, you name it. We often return to default habits. What is the solution? One of the solutions seems to be working on very small things and working on them until they become sustainable habits, and then they no longer take a big effort and you can get a compounding benefit, because by making that change in such a way that sticks, then I'm going to get a compounding benefit because that's going to be part of the way I live and work going on. Well, so too in education, rather than doing huge changes, transformations of practice, we pick highly specific things from the research that we're going to practice. We try to practice those for a period of time in such a way it sustains. And this means at the end of a sprint or the end of a cycle of improvement, we shouldn't then just revert back to what we did before, but that should now be part of our ongoing repertoire of work. So I suppose as a leader of this work, the reason why I'm going on about these things is you're going to fail if you just hand out this process and say, all right, everyone, our teams are now doing this. You're going to get rolled eyes, you're going to get pushback, and to be honest, you kind of deserve it. Because we've got to do the work. We've got to do the work to get our thinking clear that the bigger piece here is about our professional learning culture and how these three key ideas about research engagement, deliberate practice, intentional practice, and tiny shifts can be a breakthrough in the way that you design any type of professional learning approach within your school. All right. So then we get into the actual process. The reason why the process is on one page and there's only 3 steps is only simple things scale in schools. Good luck trying to get everyone to remember a 7 to 9 step process. Even if they know they're meant to use it, they don't know where they're up to in it. And only your most keen people actually progress through it. 3 steps: prepare, sprint, review. Prepare, sprint, review. Couldn't be easier. And the idea is in the prepare, we're doing the knowledge building, and there's steps and protocols and supports for people to build new knowledge. That's the teacher building new knowledge about the research and about a practice and why that practice should impact on student learning. If possible, we want them to not just know the technique or the strategy that they're going to work on, but how that connects to their kind of theory of how teaching leads to better learning. Then there's the period of the sprint, and this runs for about 4 weeks. Could be as low as 2. And during that period, people are looking for opportunities to deliberately try out that technique or strategy in the context of their classroom. And then lastly, review. And this is a form of learning where we're sense making, we're looking at our impact, we're looking at and reflecting on how it went, and we're trying to now build that new practice into our repertoire of teaching so that it transfers over time. That's the basic unit of expertise development. Can you see that? What I'm trying to say to you is if you're going to lead this work, you can't just sort of say, oh, there's this process and I need everyone to go through it, because people are going to just see that as this technical thing we've got to work through. But at the core of that process, and you download it on the website, of course, as well, it's an expertise development cycle. We've got to build new knowledge, do some practice, make sense of it, move to the next level. And so the only failed sprint is a sprint where people aren't being more metacognitive about their teaching. They're not thinking more about things, exploring and testing and learning. It's not a failed sprint if a certain group of students don't make as much progress as you hoped. That's not a failed sprint. In fact, sometimes when students don't make as much progress as you hoped, and that forces you to really rethink the connection between your teaching and learning, actually that can be even a deeper learning sprint, because the teachers are then forced to think more and inquire more about the nature of their teaching and why they may not be seeing the impact that they want. So, that's the process. That's the process. And of course, call it teaching sprints, go through the steps. But if in your school you think like even the name teaching sprints isn't going to land, just call it something else and use the process. We don't mind as a team. We want impact. We don't want name recognition. And so you might just call it your growth cycle, your improvement process, or whatever lands with you. The focus is actually on how these steps allow people to build expertise. So that's the key point about understanding more deeply as an implementation team what this process is about. People will rightly push back on you if you just, have you done the sprint yet? Have you done that thing? Are you up to this step? No, that's a below the line conversation. What you want to do is keep getting them above the line. Are we moving through these phases of adult learning that can develop expertise? All right. Last thing I want to share is I kind of challenge you a little bit to really step into the leadership of this work and take responsibility for the challenging but very doable task of taking an idea that's living outside of your school and bringing it in. And that is to have a systematic and phased approach to implementation. So if I think about 4 phases that you could think about in implementation, the first one is to explore. And this is where you and an implementation team, maybe a couple of teachers, are really just exploring, do we think teaching sprints can really add value to our current context? You could be thinking about where are the weaknesses and frustrations in our current structures of professional learning. People often tell me, people are being pulled in different directions. They might be saying to you that the conversation isn't really focused. They might say that we set goals, but we don't end up doing new things during the year and we lose focus. Whatever it is, take that data and start to think, hey, do we think that teaching sprints is actually a solution to a problem that we have? That's crucial. You've got to convince yourselves as a small team in the explore phase that teaching sprints is a good answer to a real set of problems you have internally. Nothing worse if it feels as though teaching sprints is just kind of a solution looking for a problem. And spend that time as you explore it and look at it, look at some of our resources online and really ask ourselves, should we do this? Do we really think it adds value? All right, explore. And then you can move to experiment. And an experiment, what I'd want you to be doing is working with a group of volunteers or a team or two, and work through 1 or 2 sprints with them before you take it to the whole staff. You might say, no, Simon, we want to launch really quickly, we want to get into it, and that's fine, but I actually think you're going to be cleaning up a mess later on that you should sort out through deliberate experimentation. You don't know yet how to make this process work in your school. We know it can work in all sorts of schools all around the world, from small country regional schools to large 2,000 plus high schools. But you need to take the time to learn. And so the best way to learn is to safely work with a team or two and just move through a couple of prototype sprints. Work them through it, ask them where they're struggling, ask them how much time they needed, ask them where they needed further support or where they got lost. And you're learning through rapid feedback loops with that team about what it's going to take to then make it work with the rest of them. If you can get them to have a bit of a successful experience after 1 or 2 times, now you've got a few champions and you've got a proof point, so that when you start to share it with the broader staff, well, now you're going to be in a really powerful spot because you can bring their stories and their insights to the staff, and then the staff aren't just talking about something theoretical and conceptual. People can say, yeah, well, we ran one last year or last term, last month. This is what it was like for us. This is the benefit. And now you can use their stories as social proof that this could actually work within the context. When you're at this part of expanding, really focus on the basics of making sure you've got time allocated and demarcated for prepare, sprint, review. Make sure you've invested in your sprint leaders so that people have to facilitate the process, and that you've met with them a couple of times. You've really made it as easy as possible for them to facilitate this process. Number 3, make sure the research evidence you're going to be using is all packaged up and made easy. Use our sprint starters on the website. Why wouldn't you start with those simple little videos from leading experts that can get you moving, or other research links on our research hub? But let me encourage you to kind of, lead people to work on something similar. Working on something like checking for understanding or retrieval practice or any of Rosenshine's principles of instruction. Working on things like modeling metacognitive talk or using worked examples. These are all on our website. There could be some really good ways to get in and get moving, and everyone can find a way to apply that to their craft. Of course, feel free to connect this to something else you're working on as a school as part of your school improvement plan. But my recommendation is don't just get everyone to choose anything that they want, because it's a little bit like, can you imagine turning up to a book club and everyone just chose whatever book that they wanted to read? Well, that might be fine on the start, but then when you turn up, you've got nothing to talk with each other about because you've all read different things. And so don't overplay this idea that people have to choose anything that they want to work on to get buy-in. I don't find that true. I don't find it plays out in practice. I actually find people find things more motivating when you make it easier just to pick something up, when others around them are reading and doing that work at the same time. And so the motivation actually comes from the group and the peers having a shared conversation and experience. And that actually becomes much more motivating over time than necessarily being able to choose my own adventure and anything that I want. So that expand phase might take a couple of sprints. I would probably say 2 terms worth of work, learning the process, assuming that people will get a little bit stuck. They may not follow through very well. That's fine. Like the first pancake, it never quite turns out the way that you want. Just get people through it. Just keep them moving. Don't overstress it, because it might be in sprint 2 or 3 where the process really clicks, they're into a routine and they can get going. And that's when you're starting to move into embed. And embed is a phase where you're starting to say to yourselves, okay, we want this to be an ongoing process within our school. We don't want this process just to be something, oh, remember back that year we did a few sprints, now we're doing something else. That's useless. You want sprints to be embedded as a routine such that each and every term, for years, every teacher is making progress in one area using the sprints method. But of course, they could apply it to a different focus. This year, they might be working on something on formative assessment. Next year, the focus might move to feedback. The year after, there might be some particular work you're doing around reading or vocabulary development or writing. I don't mind. But you see, the process sustains, the process is embedded, and the focus and the research you're using is shifting over time. And this is why it's worth doing implementation well. We don't want just 1 or 2 sprints occurring this year. Honestly, what's the point? But if you could take the first few sprints to learn how to get this process working and use the process as an embedded routine to build that broader professional learning growth culture, Now we're talking. Now we're doing worthy work. Work that's worth you and other members of your implementation team getting your head around it, thinking it through, and leading the work, learning from what's working and not, taking the feedback where it's not working, making adjustments until you can find a way to take this process and get it to live comfortably and successfully within your local educational context. So please do make the most of the resources that are freely available on the website. Get into the book, consider getting into our online courses and academy work if that's going to be useful to you. But in the end, there's nothing complex at all about teaching sprints. We hope what it is an elegantly simple way for you to build a professional learning culture that enables all of your educators to be evidence-informed and developing practice each and every term. And if you can pull that off, you may well, as a team, do some of the most substantial and long-lasting school improvement work that's been done in your place for a long time. I wish you all the best, and reach out and let our team know how you go as you go about the implementation work.